Welcome everyone to our monthly Office of Public Defense Services provider call, and bring you all up to date on where we're at. Just so we make sure everybody knows, the call is being recorded. So by being on the call and speaking and participating in the call, you agree to have voice and your likeness and image be recorded. I think that's it. So as far as new OPDS staff, we are welcoming somebody as a deputy defender in our appellate division, Jimmy Brewer. He's currently a staff attorney at the Oregon Supreme Court. So he's a law clerk to Justice Balmer, and so he's got lots of appellate experience. And prior to that, he was actually a certified law student at Metropolitan Public Defender at MPD. So he's got both public defense experience at a public defender office and appellate experience at the Oregon Supreme Court. So we're really happy to have him aboard. With that, I want to turn it over to Ralph Amador from Budget and Finance to bring everybody up to speed on billing issues and accounts payable. Ralph, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Ralph Amador with Budget and Finance. Start with a normal statement. We understand historical payments have been much shorter and longer times are a result of the processes that we've added to actually ensure payments are correct and valid, be in compliance with legislative direction and best practices. Processing time is necessarily lengthened. We're trying to anticipate, but we don't anticipate in the near future them getting below our goal of 30 days, but we're working to try and get. As you've all seen in the agenda that went out, the processing time is 48 days. And unfortunately, the reason for the processing time has grown is because of a combination of at least two things. One, we lost personnel, and though we've since filled those roles, it takes time to get them trained and up to speed, and that causes things not to move through the system because they were on the front end of the system. We're working hard to get there. We're also working on with an extremely antiquated system. I know folks don't like to hear that, but that's the reality of things. We have an old system that we're trying to stick onto a faster and more efficient SQL server, which should speed up our time getting stuff through the system. IT is going to be working not this weekend, but the next weekend to try and transfer all of our data into a more efficient server area that should be able to speed up time getting through the thing. Right now, we've got what we call a queuing and a throughput issue. Things are in the queue and they're just waiting, but the throughput issue is what's keeping stuff forward. If you envision a big funnel that's going through a small pipe, we can only fit so much through the pipe that we can get through the pipe that the system will allow. The more stuff by adding staff and personnel and getting them trained up, we're actually putting more stuff into the pipe. But again, all that does, because it's an antiquated system, it slows down the process and makes the throughput even less. We're hoping that, and we've translated some other systems, or antiquated systems, onto an SQL server type system, and it's working famously. So that's our plan to get that going. And hopefully we'll see some improvement within the next 30 days. Hopefully by the time we have the next provider call, would be ideal if we were less than what we're at now and getting more towards 30 days. That's our goal, and that's what we're aiming for. And we'll keep you up to speed from that going forward. As always, invoice inquiries need to go to accounts payable. CSS inquiries need to go to the CSS box. And then if you have extremely urgent issues or something, go to the OPDS AP invoice issues box. And please, again, don't copy staff, because we can't assure that it's going to get there. If you start copying staff, sure, it won't get there. That's kind of our update on that at this point. I thank you for your time. Mr. Singer.
All right, thanks a lot, Ralph. So basically, just to summarize everything in terms of where we're at. One, we know our times are longer than we'd like to be, right? We want to try and get as close as we can to 30 days as we possibly can. and they are longer than we'd like to be right now. There are two reasons for that. We lost people and had to replace them, but we have lost people and we have an antiquated IT system. As far as losing people, we have been able to replace the 3 people with 2 full-time and a temp, but 1, they need to get up to speed, and 2, once they get in there and start working on the backlog, then that's where the IT problems become greater. So the second part of the solution is that we are going to try and migrate everything over from an old Access database from the mid-90s to a more modern SQL database, which will then mean that having the additional personnel will actually allow them to push more invoices and payments through the system. So that's going to happen hopefully not this weekend, but next weekend. So once those 2 things are then in place, we're hoping over the next 3 to 4 weeks, that will bring us back further down, closer to the 30 days, which is our goal. Next, I just want to do a very brief legislative update because obviously the legislature hasn't been in session, but just in terms of where things stand with the legislature, there are 2 things going on. One is our June e-board requests, and the second thing is a legislative work group on public defense. As far as the e-board requests, the one that is most relevant to all of you is we have submitted a draft letter requesting all of the $100 million special purpose appropriation holdback from HB 5030, that it be released. We are optimistic that some or all of that money will be released. We don't know for sure. We won't know. That we appear before the e-board next week. I believe it's on Wednesday afternoon between 2 and 5 or 2:30 and 5. As I said, we will not know until we go before the e-board and they vote. We are hopeful that we will get some or all of it. We are asking for all of it, but what, if any, we ultimately get, LFO makes a recommendation, and then the elected representatives, they vote. And obviously they are free to vote as their conscience dictates. So we won't know, but hopefully we will know, and we certainly will know one way or another before the end of next week, where we stand on that. So we've asked for all of it. We're hopeful of at least getting some, if not all, but we'll have to wait and see. As far as the legislative work group, some of you may know, some of you may not know, the Chief Justice and the Governor and both the Speaker of the House and President of the Senate have all sort of agreed upon doing all 3 branch of government approach to resolving criminal justice issues, including public defense. There are obviously the DAs have their issues and the courts have their issues. And as far as the public defense portion goes, a legislative work group has been created. It is being chaired by Senator Przansky on the Senate side and Representative Paul Evans on the House side. He is co-chair of the Public Safety Subcommittee of Ways and Means. So Senator Przansky is the chair of the Judiciary. So we both have Senate and House co-chairing the legislative work group, and we have policy, Senator Przansky being chair of the Judiciary, and we have financial and Ways and Means with Representative Evans being on the Public Safety Subcommittee, a co-chair of the Public Safety Subcommittee on the House side. That work group includes OPDS has a couple people on it, including myself. The Chief Justice and State Court Administration are on it. ODCA has representation on it. OCDLA has representation on it. There are members of the prosecution. ODAA is on it. And a couple of contract administrators are also on it. I know for sure Jessica Camphy from MDI and Rob Harris from the Consortia up in Washington. County are both on the legislative work group. So it's very broad-based. It also has some national experts that I've worked with before. David Carroll, who was involved in the Sixth Amendment Center report, and Malia Brink from the ABA report. So the plan right now and what we are following is meeting monthly. The next meeting is June 16th. We had our first meeting in late May or mid-May, and I did a presentation basically outlining sort of where things stand in public defense, both currently budget-wise, where we are in terms of waiting for the June E-board on the $100 million holdback, and then sort of outlining the structure of public defense, because those that aren't involved in public defense don't necessarily realize that all of you are out there as contractors and that we as an agency, you don't work for us, you're not state employees, you're not getting paid the same as state employees. A lot of legislators and people outside the system, they think you're all just state public defenders and getting paid exactly the same with the same pay and benefits and regular reimbursements and everything as our appellate division attorneys, which of course you all know intimately is not the case. And so I just wanted to make sure we brought everybody up to speed on where things actually currently stand, so that when they start applying solutions, where they're all not jumping off from different points, we're all starting at least from the same common understanding of what the system currently looks like. And so that's where things are at. If you want more information about it, as I indicated, Sean McCrae and Maylee Browning from OCDLA are on the work group. If you're members of OCDLA and you want to know what's going on, those are two places to touch in. If you are part of a consortium and you want to know things from that angle, you've got Rob Harris from the ODCA board and Evan Andrews, who's the ODCA lobbyist. They're both on the work group. You can certainly touch base with them, pardon me, and make sure that they have all of your concerns. Also AFSCME is on it. So if you're with a nonprofit public defender, Jessica Camphy from MDI is in contact. You can also contact Shannon Wilson, and I know she'll is coordinating things with Jessica, and also AFSCME is on the work group. So those are the places to go. We are hoping over the course of the next year of work group, 9 to 10 months even, to come up with hopefully proposals to help address the situation in public defense, beginning with the 23 session and then continuing in the 24 and then the 25 long session. So those are the people to touch base with to make sure your voices are heard on the work group. Okay, that's pretty much where things stand as far as the legislative update. I want to move on with a quick update on where things stand on the contracts, because I'm sure that's something that is the top of everyone's mind. Where things stand is, as you all know, we sent out an RFQ to the entire community, including all of our current providers, as well as the wider legal community. We got back somewhere between 115 and 120 responses to the RFQ. We have spent the past week and a half compiling and organizing all of those responses, and then the past 3 days going through all of those responses, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, entity by entity, to make sure we can contract with the providers that we have for the FTE for the various case types that we project we will need, and obviously do so within our budget, which is static because we're in the middle of a biennium. So it's not going to change between now and the end of the fiscal year 22-23. We are just about, hopefully either this afternoon or by tomorrow, we will have wrapped up the process of going through all of the responses to the RFQ And then the contracts analyst, together with the CAP lawyers, will be getting in touch with all of the providers with what we are able to contract for. Recognize we're applying our hopefully improved forecast projections, because we're actually trying to have a methodology for our forecasting. We've reduced the caseload standards in terms of the amount of cases we're expecting people to cover. We have increased the pay and created the tiered pay scale to hopefully retain and compensate the people handling the more serious cases. And we are mindful, of course, of staying within our budget, so that we do have that limitation. So you should be getting contacted within either before the end of this week or next week with our proposals. There is one matter outstanding that will need to be verified in the contract terms, which is, as many of you know, if you watched the last PDSC meeting, the PDSC, we drafted language to make it very clear and explicit in provision 3.5.2 that rule 1.7 still applies, and that is sort of the safety valve for providers in terms of being requested or demanded to handle cases beyond your capacity. We were asked to we had drawn it in a way that was as far as we could possibly go towards being clear and explicit in terms of protecting the providers. The PDSC has requested that we modify that language slightly to tack us to back off of that a little bit and draw something of a middle ground, because and so we have drafted that, and that we'll be presenting it to the PDSC through email communications. The PDSC will either say, yes, we agree to that, in which case we'll have the specific language for you, or they'll say, no, we want to discuss it at an interim meeting. But we will provide that language to you as soon as we can. But it will be something in between what was put out in the RFQ and what we proposed. So just look for that. But that's something that we can go over. You can go over with the contracts analysts and with the CAP, with our juvenile and criminal trial chiefs and their deputies when we contact you regarding your specific contracts. But always keep in mind that the entire contract, whatever you sign, regardless of whatever you sign, the entire contract is subject to the Oregon Rules of Professional Conduct, and nobody can change that otherwise. You are all required to comply with the Oregon Rules of Professional Conduct, and all the attorneys working within and working for doing public defense cases, whether they're in nonprofit public defender offices, consortia, law firms, sole proprietorships, you're governed by the Oregon Rules of Professional Conduct, and that includes Rule 1.7. And so you have to be guided by Rule 1.7. So I think that's pretty much it in terms of the contracts update. We're just need to wait on that one amendment to 3.5.2 and whether we can give it to you clearly or whether we need an interim meeting to discuss that. If we did have an interim meeting, it would be either June 9th or June 10th. And if it comes to that, we will let you all know. Probably next week. So we should know that relatively quickly. I think that's all I have on the contracts update. The only thing left remaining on our agenda is the Q&A portion. As usual, just as we do at PDSC meetings, people who take the time to write in advance and that we can review the questions in advance, we're going to do those first and put them first in line. And then if there are a couple other questions, I can address those. So with that, I'm going to turn to the questions that we have that were submitted in writing. The first one is from a transcriptionist and is again about the invoice processing time. The answer is very much the same as what Ralph Amador and myself has already given, which is our objective is to get as close to 30 days as possible. We know we are not currently at that. We are currently at 48 days. As we said, the reason for that is loss of personnel and our IT issues. The loss of personnel has been addressed, but that's obviously a process because those new folks aren't ultimately where the people who left were at when they left. They get faster as they get more experience, just as any new person in a new job. And then we hope to have IT improvements in place in about 10 days or so. And so we're hopeful over the course of the next month, we are able to work that back down to closer to 30 days. But that's where we're at, and those are problems we just have to solve. The second written in question is from an investigator and asks, can someone explain why the mitigation payment rate is $20 to $25 more than the fact investigation rate? And the reason for that is historically, mitigation investigation was primarily tied to death penalty cases. That's where it was primarily existed and where mitigation was primarily used. And the reimbursement rates in death penalty cases were traditionally higher, both for the lawyers and the investigators and others working on death penalty cases, because of the seriousness of the cases and the need for the most highly qualified people in each area, attorneys, mitigation, fact investigation experts, to be involved in those cases because we're looking at a person's life and the most serious consequences. Obviously, now, certainly in terms of new cases and new death penalty cases, that has dramatically gone down, that has dramatically reduced, which is great news. However, we haven't caught up to that in terms of changing our rates for mitigation investigation, because now mitigation investigation is moving from the death penalty area to other areas, the aggravated murder cases, and whether you get true life or you get life with possibility of parole, with parole eligibility, and other serious cases where there are differences in sentencing. And our policies just haven't kept up. That is an area where we need to address it. However, if and when we address it, what legislative, fiscal, and Ways and Means have indicated is they want evidence-based, data-driven, or data-informed decision-making for changes in policy. And so that is something that the new CAP division is going to be looking at over the course of the next year. And we expect to update our policies on that over the course of the next year. But it's basically, the answer is, excuse me, is it's a historical anomaly tied to the death penalty. And now that the use of the death penalty has gone way down in Oregon, which, knock on wood, will stay the same and is good news, we now need to adjust our policies, but we've got to take a look at it and do it based on data. And we simply haven't collected the information and data to support the policy change, and we need to do that. But we anticipate doing that over the next year. The next question is again about billing times, and it's the response is no different than the previous responses I've been given. One question was added to this is what is the contingency plan for staff leaves, turnover, and unexpected events? And the fact of the matter is that we are not currently staffed to have sufficient redundancy to address unexpected staff turnover or absences due to illness or other reasons. our staff is currently cross-trained so that if we lose staff or staff is out temporarily due to illness or for other reasons, other staff can come in to assist with that work, but that means that their other work, they have less time to devote to that other work, whatever they were otherwise doing. And we are not currently staffed internally to have the redundancy and the extra capacity to absorb that. That's just not the way we're staffed. We are in discussions with LFO and Ways and Means about addressing our internal staff needs in the upcoming spring session. But I want to make very clear that our highest priority is to address issues not within OPDS, but within the provider community. So in terms of prioritizing our requests, increasing the rates, increasing the numbers of attorneys, our capacity, so that we can decrease caseloads. The only way to do that is increase the rates at which attorneys are being paid. The same is true for investigators, transcribers, interpreters, all of our other providers. And so in terms of balancing our requests, every state agency, I guarantee you, every session is going to the legislature with their wish list of additions that they want. And we do the same. And we obviously have to prioritize them. And so while it would be great, and we do want to have some built-in redundancy and capacity to be able to not fall behind when we have unexpected staff turnover or absences. We're not currently staffed that way. And in order to increase that, that's going to be competing with our higher priorities, which again are to increase the compensation and the rates in order to increase capacity with all of you. So we'll just have to see how far down our list of priorities we're able to get in terms of addressing that. The other question that was asked in this connection is, what's our practice in terms of advising, keeping everyone up to date on our processing times? Right now, this is the process that we have, which is our monthly provider calls. One of the issues I do want everyone to be aware of in the provider community is we provide the email addresses for both AP and CSS, case support services, for you guys for everyone in the provider community to send us questions about particular issues. However, one of the things you all have to recognize is, again, we have limited staffing internally, and to increase that would be taking money away from money going out the door to the provider community, and we don't want to do that in terms of our priorities. In order to respond to those questions, that takes time and resources internally, which means those folks are not actually processing the invoices or the CSS approval requests. So one of the things I want to ask everybody to do is really think carefully about when and in what circumstance you send in inquiries, because just recognize the time it takes us to respond to the inquiries, it's a zero-sum game. There's not excess capacity internally. And so anytime we spend responding to inquiries is time we're not actually processing the requests and the invoices. So it's a balance, and it's something we ask you to be mindful of when you're sending in inquiries. The next question comes from a consortia administrator, and it inquires about our budget documents from OPDS to the PDSC in terms of the budget spreadsheets. And the question ends with asking whether or not it suggests there still is a possible total surplus over 40 million. That's not true. That does not exist. As I have said many times, we anticipate there being little to no surplus, as I explained to the PDSC at the last PDSC meeting. Normal state government budgeting practice is to leave yourself about a 5 to 8%, and my practice has been a 6% margin for error. Because recognize that what we're forecasting we're forecasting a caseload, and obviously forecasting a caseload in any year is obviously an imperfect and imprecise art more than science. There are methodologies to do that, but you're trying to predict the future, and then you're trying to predict the future of lots of different actors who are people. And people, as we all know, make varieties of choices. You're talking about what is the crime rate going to look like? What's the law enforcement going to look like? What's the charging practices going to look like by 33 different DAs in 33 different jurisdictions, and law enforcement in those jurisdictions, and then the behavior of people in those jurisdictions who may or may not become our clients. So predicting that is difficult in any circumstance. Predicting it under present circumstances where we are coming out of a pandemic is particularly challenging. There just do not exist any models for how things will look coming out of a pandemic and how that will affect potential increases in cases, in charging practices, in arrest and law enforcement practices. The last major pandemic was in the 1920s, which was obviously 4 decades before Gideon and before public defense existed. So under normal circumstances, as I told the PDSC, I'd probably recommend upping that margin for error from 6% to more like 8 or 10%. We are not doing that because we are also mindful that we have unrepresented clients, and the only way to provide representation to them is to increase rates and build in more capacity to address the unrepresented clients. And so our current proposal for the contracts for the next year is going to put our budget at about maybe a 0.5 or 1% margin for error, which is not something I'm comfortable with, or that budget and finance or the deputy director here, both of whom have decades of experience combined in state government and state agency budgeting. We're not comfortable with that, but we feel it is necessary in order to get as much of the money that we have out to the provider community to provide representation and services to the clients. But there is no surplus. It is going to be eaten up by improvements to the new contracts, the lowering of the caseloads, and the extra money, which includes the tiered pay scale, and that no entity is being cut and every entity is being increased. The change in administration fees so that everybody is getting administration, and providing better reimbursement rates for the nonprofit public defenders offices for their staff investigators. So all of that is going out the door, and that's before we even get to the unfunded potential CSS liability, which is currently at about $53 million and growing at a rate of about $1.5 million to $2 million per month. So any minimal amount of money, if we were to end up at the end of the biennium with any money left over, that money gets rolled over into the next biennium budget and is going to go to pay for CSS approvals that are outstanding but haven't been paid because the invoices haven't come in yet, but they will be coming in during the last quarter of the biennium, basically next spring. So I don't know how many other ways I can say it or how many other times I can say it, or folks from OPDS, Ralph Amador, our budget and finance director, and Brian DeForest, our deputy director, can say it, but There is no surplus even with the $100 million spot. It does not exist. The next comes from another consortia attorney, provider. It's a very long question, and I think it asks a number of things about the reimbursement times, NAP. I think we've addressed that. Everybody knows where that stands. We understand that there are issues there. We are addressing the issues as best we can, given our current budget, and we hope that it significantly improves by the end of the next month, by the end of June. The question, the one additional piece to this question is about interest on an amount, on outstanding invoices. The way Oregon law works, as I think we've said in previous calls, is the Oregon government state standard is 45 days. We have indicated, and we want to be closer to 30 days because we understand that in the private sector, 30 days is how billing normally works. So we want to get as close to that as we can. But the fact is, the state agency standard is 45 days. I can tell you other states are the same way. Louisiana was the same, 45 days. As far as interest goes, we do have the ability, we are allowed to pay up to 8% per annum interest on bills, invoices outstanding more than 45 days. And we are doing that some of the time in extreme cases where we can. However, the thing you have to understand is for each individual bill, the 8% interest amounts to very small dollar amounts. And for every dollar that we get out in the form of interest, it costs us 10 to 15, even $20 in administrative costs to manually process those. So you run into a situation where the longer the processing times get, the more people are looking, you get into the situation where the interest payment on top is discretionary but can be applied, but that only further increases the processing time. So it only makes things get worse. So if you're talking about relatively small bills on an individual basis, manually providing the interest on top of that doesn't necessarily improve the situation, because some people may get small amounts of money up front, but it's going to cause the processing times to keep getting longer because that has to be done manually. And we reduce the overall amount of money that we have that can go out the door to providers because it's being consumed internally in administrative costs. So just be aware of that. It falls into the category of ultimately be careful what you wish for, because you can get $1 on the front end, but then it can be costing you $10 or $15 or $20 on the back end. And so just be aware of that and be thinking about that. And the last question I have was from a specific individual provider. I also was forwarded an email, and I've already responded to that individual provider saying that we will get back to them with a more detailed response as soon as we have that information. Okay, that's all I have as far as the pre-written questions. I think we have a brief amount of time, maybe 10 minutes or so, to address any additional questions from everyone, if anybody has one. I see one question. I can't see who it is, so.
Hi, my name is Jennifer. I'm an investigator. I think a lot of us are probably a little jumpy from last year when money ran out and people didn't get paid for a minute. And I guess I'm just wondering what happens if the legislature doesn't release it says no to releasing the 100 million that they've held back.
Yes, okay. If they do not, the entire system will be in a significant degree of trouble, because we have forecasted, we have let the commission know, and we have let the legislature, LFO, and Ways and Means know that we currently forecast we would run out of money under current spending projecting forward in late January or sometime in February of 2023. And obviously, if we can't pay, you can't work. And if you can't work, the criminal justice system and our public safety system grinds to a halt. I don't know what would happen there. One of the things, and recognize that that projection is based on if you did the current contracts at the current rates and projected out forward. That does not take into account the increases that we are applying. So, because we can't forecast out something that doesn't exist yet. Hopefully by the beginning of July, once all the contracts are signed, we will then be in a position to forecast what that looks like out. But that would undoubtedly forecast that we would run out of money sooner than that, because we're pumping more money out to the provider community. But we'd all be in a lot of trouble if that doesn't happen. So let's hope doesn't come to that. If we get an indication, we should get a strong indication within the next week to 10 days, by the end of next week, as what's going to happen with that $100 million holdback. Hopefully that doesn't happen. If it does, then obviously we will have to scramble within OPDS to decide what to do. And as soon as we come up with a plan to address that, we would let everyone know. But let's hope that it doesn't come to that.
Thank you.
I see it. Yep. Thanks, Jennifer. I see another hand up.
This is Alcott Thompson, following up on my written question, which only related to the monies in the criminal trial account. It appears that the total expenditures through the end of June will be about 114 million based on documents provided to the PDSC. The master spreadsheet suggests, as best I can tell, envisions that the contracts will be valued between 112 and 124 million. That's for the July 1, 2022 to June 30th, 2023, which means we're looking at, it looks like about 238 million will be paid to trial criminal contractors in the whole biennium. And my question is, where are these numbers wrong? Because that leaves about a 38 to 40 million dollar, if you will, surplus, depending on how the $12.8 million that the February legislature approved.
The numbers aren't wrong. I think the way you're looking at the numbers and adding them up is incorrect. The new contracts, based on our forecasts and the responses to the RFQ that we've gotten, are probably going to end up costing more like 140 to 150 million. In addition, there's been you're not including any overspending in the juvenile division, which is also recognized. While the juvenile division is separate from trial level criminal, it actually is trial level representation, right? It's just juvenile trial level representation. And there's a deficit of about 10 million is being transferred from trial criminal division to juvenile. So when you get to the end of the day, there is no surplus. Where you're making a mistake, I don't know. I'd have to go over it in detail with you, Cott. I've done it before with you. I can do it again, probably next week, not before next week, but I'm happy to do that. But you're just reading it wrong. There is no $40 million surplus. None of that, and none of that counts, right? Even none of that counts at all. The $53 million unfunded CSS liability that is outstanding that we also will have to pay at some point. So again, I don't know what numbers you're looking at, but I've gone through them. I look at them every day, and it's just not there. As I said, the new contracts between the increased FTE needs based on our forecasts and reducing the caseload and the pay increases, the amount of more money that each contract is being increased is going to swallow up all or almost all of any appearing surplus. And again, that's before you get to the CSS deficit. So.
Thank you. It appears either I am not reading the master spreadsheet right, or things have changed since that was done, and
nothing's changed since that was done, other than the FTE request. But in any event, as I explained to you after a couple of meetings ago, there is no surplus. So there just isn't.
I'm not
And
suggesting
if there's any money left, if there is any money left over, it would get rolled over into the next biennium to pay in CSS invoices, for which there is a $53 million current deficit that's growing at about $1.5 million to $2 million per month. It would have to go to the last quarter's CSS invoices. So there is no magical extra money hanging out there.
I am not suggesting that the agency doesn't have a serious financial problem. Unfortunately, the history of the agency has been to deal with budget problems by, if you will, shorting contractors. And if that's all being used up, except for a minor amount, with paying trial level lawyers, that's fine.
And that is what's happening. As I indicated at the last PDSC meeting, every entity, every contractor in every jurisdiction, all of their contracts are amounts are going up. Some are only going up a little bit. Some are going up more than others, depending on the FTE and whether their FTE is going up or down, and the particular distribution within. But everybody is getting more money than under the previous set of contracts, and the caseload standards are going down. Are they perfect? No, but the money's going up and the cases are going down, which is the direction we want to go. So they are improving. But obviously we need to get more out of the legislature in order to improve them more. I see another hand up. Was that Rebecca?
Of course it is. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, Rebecca. What's up?
Hi. Thank you, Mr. Singer. I have just a couple of quick questions. The first one is there any juvenile lawyers who are not PCRP on the legislative work group? I just want to make sure that that perspective is covered. Do you know?
Are there any juvenile lawyers who are not PCRP on the legislative work group? I do not know the answer to that question. Can you send me an email with that question, and I will look at the entire work group and see if that's the case.
Absolutely, will do. And then the second question I have is, you mentioned during this meeting that you, on the contracts, the RFQs went out, you got your response, you made some adjustments, and you mentioned lowering cases and setting up a tiered system for criminal stuff. Are you still asking non-PCRP juveniles to do the 69 new cases, and are delinquencies still all weighted the same, no matter if we're trying a rape 2 or a theft 3? Is that still the same?
The 69 does remain the same. We did not touch that. We were not able to, we were not able to touch that. And again, I make no bones about our standards on the criminal side and our standards, caseload standards on the juvenile side, be you PCRP or non-PCRP, are not where we'd like them to be or where they should be. Obviously, you know, so what we have to do is, but we can't get from where we are to where we want to be in one step. And we certainly can only do so much in the middle of a biennium because our resources aren't changing. So the 69 does stay the same. As far as how cases are weighted or treated on the delinquency side, the only change I believe was made to in homicide, juvenile homicide and waiver cases. That's the only place where any adjustment or change was made. Otherwise, everything is still the same. And again, that's not ideal either. You know, we had, as I said to the PDSC and have said before, I think in meetings with the provider community, we had like 30 to 35 changes we wanted to make to these contracts. And we said, okay, we only have the time and resources. We have to pick our best 4 or 5. But those are all things that we should try and address as we go through the next biennium and into the 23 session. Those are things that we want, that we should be looking at addressing. And obviously we won't get everything and we have to prioritize them with the legislature. One of the things I do want to reiterate, however, is, and that all of you, I want to make sure I'm very clear on, and I said this earlier, but I want to emphasize it. We as OPDS can lobby the legislature for more resources, but everyone has to recognize that every single state agency goes to the legislature and to LFO and asks for more resources. It is very different and a very different kettle of fish. We will do that and we will continue to do that because we even have to do that just to stay even with other state agencies. But the other thing that you all I want to emphasize to everyone, I know you know this, but I want to emphasize it is very different for legislators hearing from a state agency because they hear from every state agency. It is very different if local providers who are basically local small business people in a legislator's district, if they hear from their constituents. So you should figure out who your state senator is, who your state representatives are, and make sure as administrators that you're telling the attorneys in your consortia who may have different state representatives, be in touch with over the next few months and the next year with your local legislators, your senators and representatives, and be approaching them as local small businesses who are suffering and are in dire straits and say, hey, we need support from you, because that is going to help as much or way more than OPDS as an agency talking to legislators. Legislators, in my experience, in Wyoming, in Colorado, in Washington, D.C., in Massachusetts, in Louisiana, they are much more responsive to constituents who operate small businesses in their community than in a state agency as a whole.
I plan to do that, and I hope to have the opportunity to continue to work with OPDS to hopefully improve these contracts. Thank you, Mr.
Great.
C.
All right, thanks a lot. All right, I think that's pretty much all we have time for, and we're coming to the end of the hour anyway. Hopefully we will have news, and hopefully it will be good news from the June board on where we stand on the 100 million special purpose appropriation holdback. But we will provide an update at the end of next week or the beginning of the following week with an update of what the results were from the June board. Thanks so much, everyone. That's pretty much it for this month's provider call. Appreciate everyone being here and all of the questions.